Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Todd Clint's SharePoint Netcast number 141. Tonight's Netcast was recorded live January 21st, 2013, also known as my 39th birthday. Tonight's Netcast is, as always, sponsored by the fine folks at Rackspace.com. They're providing the download bandwidth that you've got. If you came to my blog to find the page to get connected to this, they're sponsoring that. They gave me that flag in the background. They've got the background here, the fancy microphone. This whole Netcast thing that you're watching and enjoying is all because of the folks at Rackspace. So if you need some SharePoint hosting or just a shoulder to cry on, go to www.rackspace.com/SharePoint and tell them Todd sent you. Okay, so last week, the next part we always do with the Netcast is the production notes, and last week, so I forgot, since today's my birthday, I got a birthday hat here to wear, celebrate the occasion. So we always do the production notes, and for a while they were getting kind of stale because I wasn't screwing things up anymore. I had everything, kind of at a good equilibrium, and I decided to go mess things up for 2013. And so last week was the very first Netcast that I did on Ustream. I got rid of Stickcam, went to Ustream, did that for a couple of reasons. Stickcam had some things I didn't like. I didn't like how the chat room worked. I didn't like some of my options with that, so I went to Ustream, and Ustream also has a pretty good producer software that I'm using to actually broadcast this live. So Stickcam, you just say, here's my webcam, and up we go. Ustream actually has some software that I can do some fun things with, and I'm actually going to be able to demonstrate that in a minute. But we did all that last week. That was the very first one. Y'all were very, and there I went and did it again. You guys were very understanding, very helpful as I got things working. The sound broke. My big fancy microphone let me down last week, and some other things, but we got it all working, and thanks to you guys I've been able to kind of get through this and make some improvements. So everything worked pretty well. Had a couple of some feedback from you guys. Obviously the number one feedback is that you guys don't like the ads. So let's talk a little bit about that. With Stickcam, every time I started the channel up, you guys had to watch ads. And with Stickcam, the channel was based on me being online, and the chat room was based on me being online. So by me splitting those out, now if I need to log off or reboot my machine or something, you guys don't lose the chat room. And there's a bunch of people in the chat room now, good 20, 25 people. And that's independent of Stickcam and independent of Ustream now, so that's awesome. But when the chat started, or when the stream started, you guys would always get an ad. And it wasn't a huge deal, but a few of you made comments about it, and there wasn't really much I could do about that. So one of the things that I can do with Ustream is, as a producer, as a broadcaster, I can pay for the ads to go away. That package that I would buy starts at $100 a month, and it gives me 100 viewing hours, I think, which means, you guys, this is 30 minutes now, 40 minutes, so how many times a month, all that. So it would probably really end up costing $200, $250 a month to get rid of the ads for you guys. And I'm still working on that. I haven't given up on that. A few of you last week were kind enough to send Jeff Diverter emails about that, jeff.diverter@rackspace.com. If you do email the man, remember he's my boss. He can fire me at a moment's notice. Why he hasn't fired me yet, honestly, I don't understand. But let's not push things. But if you do email Jeff about the ads, just let him know that you enjoy the Netcast, but be very gracious. Start your email off by thanking him for his support. He has been a huge supporter of this Netcast since long before he was my boss, since long before I worked at Rackspace. So if you email jeff.diverter@rackspace.com, start it out by thanking him, letting him know that you appreciate what he's done. And then just let him know, you like the Netcast, and it would be awesome if we could find a way to get rid of the commercials. Now, kind of doing the grassroots campaign thing. I don't know if I'm going to have to start, doing bake sales or lemonade stands or something like that. But in the meantime, you can also buy out the ads on your end as a viewer for $4 a month. You can become a premium member of Ustream, and then you won't see any commercials until we get it figured out on our back end you can fix it on your end for $4. And so in the chat room, I put that link in there. It's www.ustream.tv/premium-membership. And none of that money goes to me. That's all Ustream. I'm not making a penny from it. But that's Ustream, so you can watch any Ustream videos for that matter for that $4. So please consider that. Ustream is providing a great service here. I got no problem with them getting paid for it. But hopefully we'll be able to figure something out on the back end so that we can offer this commercial free. Also, I think if you watch this with some kind of a device, if you watch it with your iPad or your Android device, there's Ustream devices for both of those, and I think you don't get any ads that way either. So that's one of the changes that we're making, is the ads. Another thing that I've done is on the Netcast page. Now there's actually a page to go to. That was one of the changes that I wanted to make. You can always just go to toddclint.com/netcast, and that should be everything you need. Now I need to fix that page, have links to the latest episode, that kind of stuff. But one of the things you can do now is you can watch the stream live and watch the chat live inside of the page if you want to. So that's kind of nice. It's easier to get to. Had a couple of people last week mention that that they wished it was horizontal instead of vertical, and I'm still working on that a little bit. But if you want to test the page out, there's the URL for the side-by-side page. I'll end up putting a link on the front page for the side-by-side page once I figure out where everything's going to go. But that gets the video on one side, the chat room on another side, so that you can watch that the way that you want to. So I'm open to all kinds of suggestions about all this. Jack in the chat room, him and I have been trading emails for the last week. He's got an awful lot of really good ideas and things that will help improve this Netcast. So if you're like Jack and you have some suggestions for me, you can email me at todd.clint@rackspace.com, and let me know what you think. Let me know what I can do better. Let me know what I can improve upon, and we'll make that happen. Again, some more changes coming. We got some better ideas as I just kind of feel around this. What works. I'm getting my mind wrapped around the Ustream software, and then I can start adding some cool stuff. But again, if you've got some suggestions, by all means, let you know. Doug in the chat room has suggested that I wear suspenders for all of my Netcasts. Doug, I don't even know if I own a pair of suspenders. A cape, Joanne, I do have a cape, so I could do that. I also have a Lucadore mask, one of those Mexican wrestling masks. I could wear that, and of course my Hello Kitty birthday hat, and wear that too. So for the next couple of weeks, I expect the production notes will be entertaining as I continue to figure this out and screw things up. On to the topics. Now, I alluded to this at the beginning here a little bit. Today is my birthday. I am 39 today, and I don't know if it's still the case, but my mom is actually in the chat room right now, or she was. So if you want to thank my mom, this is all her fault, essentially. You can thank her. But one of the things that came about from this a few years ago, a guy named Dan Usher, who's not in the chat room tonight, I don't think. He might be listening online. But Dan got this great idea a couple of years ago that for my birthday, he would talk to you folks that watch my Netcast and all that, and people that I know in the community, and he would gather some money together, and he would dedicate and give some money to charity. In my behest, because I give money to charities. It's kind of a good thing that I like to do. So Dan got this idea together, and he kind of put this all together, this charity thing, and it was awesome. And I gave I gave Dan a very big hug the next time I saw him. A little inappropriate, but Dan went with it. He was a good sport. But that's something that's happened now for every birthday since I've been doing this Netcast. So I started the Netcast in March of 2009, so we've done it in 2010, 2011, 2012, and now 2013. Exactly, that's how it happened. Take Dan, make a hug, you get Doug. And so once again, not to be outdone, it's happened again this year. So this year, Lori Gowan, who's in the chat room right now as Lori G, stepped up and reached out to a bunch of you guys to get something going. And she talked to me a couple of months ago about what charities my wife and I personally give to. I kind of gave her a rundown of what we do. And so she got a hold of you guys and collected a bunch of money. And so today, it was kind of funny. Lori knew when all this was, and she wanted to wait as long as she could to get as many people involved before she sent the card out to me. And then we forgot that today was Martin Luther King Day and there's no mail being delivered, so I didn't get the card yet. But Lori, pretty quick on her feet, before she sent the card, she scanned it just in case something happened, and so fortunately we've got that. So this is what the card looks like. It's got a bunch of the names of the people on there. I can't read the card right now. I can't read them all off. But a bunch of you did that. You came up with she says the number in the card is wrong. It's $700 now. You guys got $700 and donated to the food bank in my name, and that is awesome. Thank you all very much. I can't begin to tell you how happy that makes me and how much I appreciate that. Very cool of all of you to do that, and very cool for you to continue to do it. Like I said, this is like 3 or 4 years running that you guys have done this. So every one of you, very generous. I appreciate that. And can you guys confirm in the chat room that you're seeing the card live? Oh yeah, because you're making the comments on. I guess I can just look it on the TV. I'm actually watching myself over here. So I was talking about the Ustream thing. This is one of the things that I can do with Ustream now, is I can do easy stuff like this. So again, I can't begin to tell you how happy this is all very cool. When Lori started talking about it, a couple months ago, I thought this will never happen. It's a good thing, but it's probably run its course. $700, and that's not counting the $1,000 that Jim Ehrenberg did last month for Christmas. So that's pretty cool. So to do my part, I will match your guys' donations. I don't know if my wife is the other anonymous person in here. I hadn't really talked to her about this before I came online, but so we'll go ahead and do that. And I don't know if we'll do it. I think Lori sent the money to the food bank. We'll either do the food bank or my local high school has a foundation where they give scholarships and all that kind of stuff, and I might give it to them. But I will absolutely meet your guys' donations, because that is very cool. Like I mentioned last week, or the week before, charity is just something that I try to do a lot with. And if you guys remember back when I started this Netcast, and probably what Dan's motivation was I used to do that as a kind of a fundraiser sort of thing, where I would say for every download I got, I would donate $1 to a charity. Unfortunately, when I was doing that, my downloads were only 200 or 300 a week. Now I'm a little over 2,000 a week, so I just can't afford to do that as often as I'd like to. But thank you all very much. And every person, I didn't get the card from Lori until this afternoon, but every person in there, I'll email you personally and thank you for it. That was very cool. You didn't have to do that. I'm very honored that you did that for me. So thanks again. Great birthday present. I'm very excited about that. And I'm also kind of excited that I can do this and broadcast it now, because that really helped out, having the scanning and all that. Okay, so enough of the touchy-feely stuff. We got some technical topics to talk about here. Mom, this is your cue. If you don't want to sit through the rest of all this, you can drop off now. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and so we got a couple of things that I wanted to talk about last week, but just ran out of time. And one of them is SQL disk layout. So this is a question that I get a lot from customers and people and all that, is how to lay out SQL disks. And unfortunately, this is one of those things, you hear people say the answer is it depends, and this is one of those things that definitely depends. If you want to do things perfectly right with SQL, you really need 5 disks at least. And so this blog post kind of explains that a little bit, but I linked the blog post because it's kind of got the cheat sheet, the dumbed down version at the end of there on what each disk does. And so essentially what this guy's saying, and what I would tell people if you have an unlimited amount of money, which nobody does, here's the best case scenario for how to leverage SQL. You have one disk that's probably mirrored, and that is your OS and the SQL binaries, and that's all there is on it. You have another disk that is ideally RAID 10 or something like that, but you can probably get away with RAID 5. RAID 5 is slow for writes but good for reads. You could probably get away with that second disk, and that is where you would put your system databases, things like that. Your third disk would be mirrored, not RAID 5, mirrored, and you would only have tempdb on that. Tempdb is scratch space that SQL uses, and it uses it in the middle of operations to save things, so you want that to be as fast as possible. Then disk 4 would be your user databases. So that would be, in our case, that would be all your SQL databases, your content databases, your SharePoint config, that kind of stuff. Those would go on your fourth disk. And then your fifth disk is the transaction logs for the databases on your fourth disk. And so for disk 5, since your transaction logs are very write heavy, you want something that's fast for that, mirroring, things like that. So we all can't do that though. I mean, because if you look at that, just with that layup there, that's 10 spindles, that's 10 disks. And you can't normally afford that, but it's kind of a good guideline to start with. A couple questions from the chat room. Trevor Seward is reminding us to bump up the cluster size on NTFS because of the way SQL is. So I think he's got it in there. The recommended cluster size for your disk when you format it is 64K. And then Mark is asking in the chat room, search goes on disk 2 or a separate SQL host. That is very astute of you to notice that, Mark. In the things that I just talked about, the search databases would go on group 4, the fourth disk. But with SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint 2010 and 2007 to a smaller degree, those databases are very read and write intensive, and how fast they respond dictates some behavior inside of SharePoint. So ideally you would get those onto their own very fast disks, but again, it's all about money. And Jason Himmelstein brings up an interesting thing in the chat room. He says if you can put the tempdb logs on its own mirror drive, that's also ideal, and he's absolutely right. Without getting into too much SQL architecture and SQL theory and all that, your writes go to the transaction logs and your reads, performance-wise, come from the database files. And so if you do like Jason suggests and you put tempdb, the databases on one disk and the tempdb transaction logs on another disk, then you're going to get fast reads, fast writes, but it's going to cost you 2 more disks. But definitely that helps. A couple things in the chat room. So I think Doug said, I thought you just put SQL on a VM, so that gets Doug kicked out of the chat room. Sorry about that, buddy. Let me grab that. But then he also said, how does this work with a NAS? So the short answer is it doesn't change anything. But let's talk a little bit about this. So with the article and the things that I was talking about, sort of assumes direct attached storage, or DAS. So you've got a big physical iron box with SQL and then a bunch of actual physical hard drives connected to it. But we don't do that anymore. I mean, that's just not how SQL servers are. So when it comes to how you carve this stuff out, it's pretty much exactly the same. If you have a SAN or a NAS, you still want to use the same kind of layout. But it becomes more important because you have to understand the abstraction between what shows up as the F drive in SQL and what the actual physical boxes are that are making that happen. So this is where you're going to have to know your storage team well and talk to them. And the article talks a little bit about LUNs and things like that. You need to understand that, and you need them to not just carve you out a partition, but you need them to understand that there needs to be some physical drives and some spindles, and tempdb is not sharing spindle space with all that. So and your storage guys are going to fight you on that, and they're going to tell you stories about lots of cache and things like that. And you just got to be careful with that. Now, there is a tool that you can use called SQL.io, and I think if you just go to Bing or Google and search for SQL.io, just as 5 characters, there's a really old tool, and I'm guessing it could be close to 10 years old, that Microsoft has, that just you run it on a SQL box, and it tells you what the IOPS, the input output per second characteristics of that drive are. And SharePoint has guidelines for what IOPS you need for different databases. So you can use SQL.io, measure each of your disks. That will tell you what their throughput is, and then compare that to what databases you're going to put there. But there is a lot to that. But looking at this looking at this document, it kind of gives you an idea where to start with carving things up and where things go. But having everything, having all your databases and all that on one big drive and one big spindle is kind of scary. And I was going to talk about this next week, but I'll go ahead and talk about it this week. Performance in SQL, your SQL performance absolutely dictates your SharePoint performance, to the point where things can actually fail. So I had one customer today that was talking about their search results take a long time. Specifically, the metric that they measured was that their service level agreement, their SLA, said that the search results page has to come back in 8 seconds or less, 8 seconds or fewer. And it's coming back in 10, so it needs to be faster. So they said, what can we do to make our search results page come back more quickly? And I had 3 letters for them: SQL. When you do search queries, there's a big component of that happens in SQL and a big component that happens on a local file system. But checking your query databases and making sure that everything's fast and all that is a good place to start. Had another customer who was talking about having some problems in SharePoint 2013 with user profile social stuff. All of that's getting pulled out of databases, and so you want to make sure that your databases are good with that too. There's some discussion in the chat room about, now that I've scared you all, how can you tell how good your things are and performance counters and stuff like that. Definitely, let's see who mentioned it first in the chat room. Doug mentioned it. He said he was going to try the Idera tool. That's a good place to start. Idera has a free tool, both SharePoint and SQL, where you can do some performance stuff, and they have a free one, and then they have a for pay one also, and they're both very good. So definitely go to idera.com, idera.com, and see what they can do for you. But definitely, if you're having any kind of performance problems with SharePoint at all, unless your web front end has 2 gig of RAM, I would definitely look at SQL and see how SQL's doing. Drives, memory, all that kind of stuff. So on the and in the chat room, Ian is saying if you mention Sean McDonough, you can get a deal for the Idera tool. I think he's joking. Sean's in here sometimes. So talking about SQL, had a comment on my blog. My blog post on SQL aliases. The comment was wondering how SQL licensing impacts this, and if you have lots of aliases set up, if that impacts your SQL licensing at all. Oddly, it does not. Those of you that have actually had to pay for SQL is really expensive, like a lot, like extortion expensive. And so the fact that you don't have to pay for an alias is kind of crazy. I hadn't really thought about it. But you don't have to pay for aliases because you're not really doing anything to the server. It's all a client-side setting. So you don't have to worry about that. You can set up aliases as much as you would like. But it reminds me of another thing that I wanted to mention. Stumbled across this on a customer a couple of weeks ago. They're using SQL aliases, and everything's working fine. But they didn't know that there are 2 sets of SQL aliases on a client. If you go to start run CLI CONFG, that opens up the client configuration tool. That's kind of the standard way that most people make aliases. On a 64-bit OS, which all of our SharePoint servers are now, that only sets the 64-bit alias, which is fine for SharePoint 64-bit only. But for this customer, I was troubleshooting some problems, and I needed to open up SQL Management Studio, and that is 32-bit. And they had not set the 32-bit alias also, and so I couldn't use the alias to connect. Now all I had to do was look and see what the alias pointed at and put that into into SQL Management Studio, and then I was able to get in and do what I wanted. But the public service announcement here is that when you set your SQL aliases, set them both for 32-bit and 64-bit. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. There is a 32-bit version of client config, which I should have had that I could put in the chat room, but it's in a weird directory. It's like in the WoW64 directory or something. You can load that up, and that will set your 32-bit aliases as well. Your aliases are all just registry settings, so you can, any way you edit the registry, PowerShell, .reg files, whatever, you can just add that 32-bit directory or that 32-bit hive in there. I should probably blog this. There's a lot of information here. Or also, if you have SQL Management Studio installed, if you have the SQL Server, I forget what it's called, but there's a configuration tool. It might be called that, SQL Server configuration tool. You can set both aliases in there, 32-bit, 64-bit. So, but that's my recommendation, especially as a guy who has to fix SharePoint when it's broken. Any SQL querying tools that I'm going to use are going to be 32-bit, and they're not going to have the alias. So obviously it's not a huge deal. I can go check and see what it points to, but it's just one less step. And when you win the lottery and you quit your SharePoint job and you go move to that beach in Tahiti, you're going to leave that SharePoint farm behind, and there's going to be people who are going to be happy that you set both aliases. But I will try to blog this in the next week or two and have all that information in one spot. But definitely set both aliases. So in the chat room, Jack asked, any advice for remote blob store as it relates to reducing the SQL load? So remote blob store has been around for a couple of versions of SharePoint now, and it keeps your blobs out of SQL. So yeah, I would guess that would reduce SQL I/O. Now, what it's not going to do is reduce requests and all that, but depending on where your blobs are at and how you got it configured, now SharePoint's just going to go to SQL to get the pointer to the blob as opposed to actually pulling the blob off the disk. So I would guess that would help some I/O contention if you had it, maybe. But of course, with Remote Blob Store, be terrified of it. Make sure you can back it up. More importantly, be sure that you can restore it, because with Remote Blob Store, your precious documents just kind of disappear. It's kind of scary. Remote Blob Store frightens me a little bit. So this was a good one. Got an email. I think I got this via email. I got this a while back, and I kind of forgot. But John Wilson emailed me or stopped by my house, I don't remember, and kind of wanted me to spend a few minutes talking about when to create new web applications versus new site collections versus new webs. He's kind of wanted a little understanding about that. And so that's a discussion that we have all the time when we teach classes and all that, because it's important to understand where the boundaries are at for web applications and site collections and webs or subsites. And that changes a little bit with SharePoint 2013. So first, let me tell you that as a general rule, my bias leans towards scaling by site collection. When the product SharePoint was designed, 12 years ago or whatever, with SharePoint 2003, because I don't remember if SharePoint 2001 had site collections or not. But SharePoint 2003 was the first version where I really had to deal with site collections a lot. And it's obvious that is what Microsoft intended the unit of scale to be, with site collections. Site collections are boundaries for permissions and sandbox solutions, all kinds of stuff. They are the smallest autonomous group that can be backed up, that's full fidelity, that gets your alerts and your workflows and permissions and all that kind of stuff. So whenever anybody asks me, should I create a new blah or whatever, my stock answer without giving it any thought at all is you should create a new site collection. So just know my bias going in. So I think the general rule is you should probably create site collections. You would create a web instead if you want to inherit things like look and feel or users, or you want, it's the same group of people, because the important thing to keep in mind is that site collection is a permissions boundary. Now with a web, you can break inheritance and you can kind of keep some people out and some people in, but there are a few ways for a few people to get around that if you're a site collection administrator, things like that. So if you need a security boundary, that's a job for a site collection. Also, you want your quotas. A site collection is the smallest unit that you can put a quota on. And so if you want to control your growth and all that, then you need to have site collections at different levels to manage your quotas, things like that. So those are kind of the story for that. If you have a group, like for instance, if you've got the accounting group and they are setting the thing up for accounts payable, maybe since it's all accounts payable is just a web under the accounting site collection, things like that. But a web is going to use the same quota, the same groups and users and all that kind of stuff as the root of that site collection. So that's the other thing. Now, where it changes a little bit in SharePoint 2013 is with web applications and site collections. Because with 2013, there were some improvements on host-named site collections. So before SharePoint 2013, all of your site collections that were in the same web app were differentiated by path. And you didn't want to have too many web apps because every web app was an application pool and things like that. There were soft limits around that would impact performance. With SharePoint 2013, we can use host-named site collections, and those host-named site collections can have their own URL space, but be inside of an existing web app, so they don't have as much IIS overhead, as much RAM and things like that. So that is its own site collection in its own URL space, but not its own web app, which is a little different than how we're used to doing things. The problem with host name site collections is management. You will find no trace of host name site collections in Central Admin, with a couple of very minor exceptions. But you can't create them in Central Admin. There's a lot of management that you can do of host named site collections in Central Admin. So you better be really good at PowerShell, and everybody else that uses your farm had also better be really good with PowerShell, because that's how you're going to manage all that. Now, host name site collections have been around for a while. They've had many different names. They used to be called host header site collections, which is kind of a misnomer because you actually can't have a host header in IIS if you have host named site collections. But the name now, host named site collections, is pretty accurate. But they've increasingly gotten better, and with SharePoint 2013, Microsoft actively supports them. And that has a lot to do with, because I'm sure that's how Office 365 is architected in the background, is with host named site collections. So whether you need a new web app or a new host named site collection inside of your existing web app then has a lot to do with how you want to scale your databases and how many app pools you've got, things like that. One of my coworkers and a friend of mine, Raymond Mitchell, he's in the chat room right now. He doesn't like host name site collections. Host name site collections, true story, stole his bicycle when he was a kid and stuffed him into a trash can and shaved his dog. So Raymond understandably has a lot of baggage with host name site collections. And he actually said that they stink. And he said that they stink so bad that Ustream jumped in and showed him a Febreze commercial. So there you go. You got it all figured out. In the chat room, Jack is asking, with these host name site collections, how does IIS and DNS work? Do you point all of the URLs to one IP address? Yeah, that's exactly how it works. So you have IIS sites like you normally would, and instead of having one IIS site per web app, which is essentially address space, now you would have one IIS web site that would have a web app that would be hosting your host name site collections, and so that's where you would point your DNS. So Jack is asking, do these work with SSL? They do. That was tricky in previous versions because you needed wildcard search or something like that. But Windows 2012 and IIS 7 or 8 on supports this thing called server name indicator or something. I believe the initials are SNI. But it is a way for the browser to tell the server the address, the host name that it's going to, with an SSL packet, because the problem that you had before was the host name was encrypted inside of the SSL packet. So when the request got to IIS didn't know which certificate to decrypt the packet with, because the name of this host certificate, it was a chicken and the egg thing. It was very funny. But with Windows 2012 and with all your newer browsers, they support this SNI, and so you can have multiple SSL certificates with multiple namespaces on the same IIS web app, IIS site. So that problem has mostly been figured out. Now Mark is saying, my preference would be to offload SSL on a load balancer. So I'm with you, Mark, but here is one of the problems with host name site collections. You don't get alternate access mappings with host name site collections. And so if you're terminating SSL someplace else, then when the request comes to SharePoint, it comes in as HTTP. And so SharePoint is going to respond in kind and reply back with HTTP with all kinds of HTTP links on its page. So I don't know how you do the SSL offloading with hostname site collections. I will tell you that last year in October, November, whenever the Stockholm SharePoint conference was, the SharePoint Exchange Forum, I asked Spence this exact question, and he assured me that there was a way to do it, and then we ran out of time and he didn't show me. So I don't know how to do it. But Spence assures me that there's a way to do that, to do SSL offloading with hostname site collections and have all the links be correct. So I just need to shoot Spence an email and see how to do that. But this is one of those things that's new with okay, so a couple people in the chat room are saying, yeah, you're a big dummy, it can be done. Maybe I just need to play with it. I don't know. But these host-named site collections are kind of a new thing with SharePoint 2013, with Windows 2012 and this SNI stuff. Server name indication. There you go. So that's kind of a realistic thing to use now. I would have never done it in SharePoint 2010 or 2007, but with 2013, it's there. So it further complicates that whole: do I create a web app or do I create a site collection? So if you don't create a new web app and you do a hostname site collection, then that hostname site collection, even though it has a different URL, has all of the same web app settings as your other web apps. So we're talking about things like authentication providers, throttling limits, recycle bin, that kind of stuff. So as long as that's not a problem, then you're good to go with hostname site collections in an existing web app. So that was a great question, John. I appreciate it. Sparked some great conversation here, and it looks like a couple of folks picked up some new things, so that's good. So Doug is asking, what's the server overhead of a web app? Not a lot, but not insignificant once you get a bunch. And I forget what the soft limit for SharePoint 2013 is. I think it's 10 web apps per server. And okay, Tim's correcting me at 20. So the overhead is your app pool. You know, every web app, creates an IIS site, and every IIS site has its own worker process, its own app pool. Well, not every site has its own app pool. Probably has its own app pool, but the chat room's correcting me on that. We can have 10 app pools, 20 web apps. No limit on web apps? Okay. So the concern more becomes your app pools. The app pools are processes, so they're RAM. And the other thing is this whole thing where when people say, SharePoint's slow. Whoever the first person is to hit SharePoint, it's always very slow. That's your app pool warming up because it recycles every morning at 1 or 2 something. The more app pools you have, the more recycling has to happen, things like that. But it's an incremental thing, and like the document says, it's a soft limit. So it's one of those things where you're slowly boiling the frog in the pot of water. Things just slowly get slower and slower and slower. So there is that. But I will tell you, and so another good thing about hostname site collections in 2013 is that they can have managed paths now. And I don't remember if that was possible in 2010, but it was certainly not possible in 2007. So now you can have a hostname site collection and then create site collections underneath that. So good conversations. A couple other quick things that that I wanted to mention. Oh, Trevor says you could have managed paths in 2010. Excellent. I'm trying to sell a car right now, though honestly not very hard. I need to do that. And I was looking a couple of weeks ago at putting some pictures of it online, and I stumbled across this image slider for SharePoint 2013, where you could do like an image slider thing that's kind of like the content by search web part in Enterprise. So that was kind of a cool thing. Uses JavaScript and other stuff I don't understand, so I thought I'd give that a link. The last thing was one of the friends that I met out at the New Media Expo a couple weeks ago was a Netcast watcher, Lynn Dye, and so I've been following her blog, and last week she's blogged a blog post on 5 mistakes that people make on LinkedIn, and it's entitled Don't Make These 5 LinkedIn Mistakes, and you can find that on her blog at extremevirtualsupport.com. So the interesting thing about that is she used me as an example of somebody who was screwing up LinkedIn. So that was a good thing. But it talks about stuff like having your pictures and having a good description and all that. For those of us in the SharePoint community, there's a lot of activity on LinkedIn, and it's become kind of a professional hub for finding people and things like that. I didn't have a LinkedIn profile until after the Rackspace acquisition. I never needed one. So I kind of half put one out there, and that's how I got flagged, is here's somebody who's doing it wrong. So if you've got a LinkedIn profile and just want to kind of do the bottom 5 things, Lynn's blog post is a good one for that. Or as Shane likes to think of it, I suck so bad that people are actually blogging about how badly I suck. So that was a good time. All right, so now on to the promotion stuff. As always, I need to promote the book that I am slogging through and trying to write, the SharePoint 2013 Professional Administration. You can pre-order it on Amazon, but I will also be selling signed copies on my website. So if you want one with my name on it and me writing something inappropriate about Shane, you'll be able to buy those off of my website. I'll have more information about that. But I talked to Wiley about that, and I think the discount that I get if I buy direct from them will allow me to suck up the shipping costs and all that. So we'll get that. Next thing is SP TechCon. That is March 3rd through the 6th, and that is at www.sptechcon.com. Shane and I are doing some sessions out there, doing admin 1 and 2, doing an install session. I'm going to try real hard to do my Netcast while I'm out there, because I'm going to be out there Monday night. So we're going to try to do that. Stay tuned for details on that, and we'll see. Also got a couple other speaking things coming up this year. Haven't finalized them yet, but stay looking on that. Another thing that I need to do on my blog is I used to have a good calendar of where I was going to be, and I kind of fell off on that. I need to get that back up to speed. So do that. So one other thing I just thought about, but I forgot. Got a comment on my blog about my SharePoint 2010 build list. And basically the person was saying this build list is great, you're great, the information is great, but they wanted a way to sort it and all that kind of stuff. The way the build list is right now is the top is RTM, and then as new builds come out, it just kind of goes down. And so I guess my question to you guys is, for those of you that go to my build lists for 2010 or 2013, how would you like to see that done? What is the best way to get that information to you guys? I'm open to suggestions. Right now, it's obviously just in a blog post, so it's bound by that. Got a couple of suggestions in the chat room of putting it on SkyDrive and Excel. Not a horrible idea. I could do that, and I'm not opposed to doing it multiple ways if there's a couple of ways to do that. So. So Trevor's saying put it, all right, so I'll give that a shot. But if you have any comments on how I should do that, todd.clint@rackspace.com, @toddclint, or you can leave it, leave a comment on the blog post. Got a couple of them, a couple of people in the chat room saying make it so the newest builds are on top, and I kind of understand that, because you want to find out what the newest one is, and the scroll. I can see the pain with that. But just to let you know, I mean, I do look at my comments. I do comment back on them. So if you've got a suggestion, hit me up. So all right, folks, I'm coming in on 45 minutes. So I've gone a little over. So Again, I broadcast this every Monday night at 8:30 Central, and you can go to www.toddclint.com/netcast, and you can watch the live feed there and the chat room. Got a bunch of people in there, 30-some people. Had 30 people watching here. That's all going to be there. You can download the MP3 versions. You can also download video versions if you'd like to see that. That's you can go to toddclint.com/netcast. The RSS feeds are there. And or you can also go to my blog, and there's going to be a link there, so you can get the video files as well. And as always, if you've got suggestions, hit me up, and I would love to improve this. And the Ustream thing seems to be working better. I was able to show the birthday card live and all that. But as always, if you've got suggestions, hit me up. I would love to make this thing better. So thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of my birthday for me. I appreciate that. Thanks again to all the people who worked with Lori and did that money. I could not be happier and more excited, and look to be hearing from each of you. Thanks, everybody, and have a good night.